It's Bob74H, the alt-right millennial black with another video. This time I'm covering leftism is bullshit, but it's part 2 of that previous video. And unlike my previous part 2s, this is just going to be a entirely different video. It's going to be topic different, it's going to be structured. I mean, I don't really structure my videos, but it's going to be just an entirely different video, different points of contention. So the first one in question is going to be with representation and the idea of such. So the idea of representation is rather racist if you really think about it, or sexist if you really want to go there, because it's giving precedent towards one person based off their race or gender because they need to be represented. So it's honestly just giving racist or sexist thoughts towards the idea, because you're representing and giving privilege to people of a perceived or diminished status, as they like to say, even though that's factually untrue, which, like I said in the previous video, because the right-leaning people, the most of the men are relegated to just 4chan and YouTube. So it's literally impossible to really hardenedly say that they're oppressed or of a lesser status. But representation is inherently racist, because it's inherently racist, sexist, and against everything that they claim to be for, right? Because it's supporting one person based off their race and or sex over another. So it's by definition racist, right? And like I think I said this before, I think it should be off the skill of the person in question. So if they're having a black character, it should be to have a black character. It shouldn't just be to have a agenda. It should be integral to the character as a whole, right? Or there shouldn't be a reason to include it, right? And another thing is they say, oh, it empowers them. It gives them power. And if you know anything of what empowerment means in a traditional or hierarchical society such as our own, empowerment means they are going to increase one's power. But in order to increase one's power, you must also decrease another's power, because that's how a hierarchy works. So we would be at the bottom now, but what would happen is the empowerment of women and all these minority groups would depower us by extension. So that's kind of how that works, because it's an hierarchical structure, right? So that's how empowerment and depowerment work. They go hand in hand, except one empowers another. But to empower something must mean you must be depowering another, because you're overpowering, right? An individual. So what are you empowering them against? See, that's what they won't like to bring up, though. They always bring up empowerment and all this, but they won't bring up what they're empowering against. And if you look in between the lines and you look at the little fringe people within the already fringe feminism group, in the already fringe LGBT, AGBC, LBT group, you'll see that it's really just targeting men and the patriarchy, as they like to call it, even though it doesn't factually exist. And equality is an unrealistic concept to begin with, as there's always going to be a greater power that will be greater than you. I mean, such as a president or a senator. You know, there's always going to be some person of a higher standard. So it's impossible to truly have equality in a system such as that. But you guys are going to like to put it up as if that can be the case, even though it actually cannot be the case. And there's also the argument of physicality that can be said. Am I ever going to be equal to someone who's in a wheelchair or someone who's physically disabled? Of course not. Because I'm always going to be physically stronger than they are, because they are invalid or they're infunctionable. And I mean, I can't say that would be... I mean, that sucks for them, don't get me wrong, but that's not something I can control. They were born inferior, and that's not really something I can do about, because I'm always going to be physically superior to someone who's born without legs or born without an arm, you know what I mean? So, I get what they're trying to say, but it's obvious that they can't read between in the lines and say that, oh yeah, this is literally impossible based off the fundamental foundations of society, right? Because, like I said, there's just things that you can't overpower, right? You can empower someone all you want, but they're not going to be better than a prime minister. A person in a wheelchair is never going to beat a guy who has legs in a fist fight. You know, it's just some people are just born better. And you know what? You can either go and whine about it all fucking day on Twitter, or you can go say, okay, that's the way things are, and I move on with my life. But these people don't want to move on with their life. They want to cry, bitch, and moan. It's like, seriously, it's just fucking retarded. Move on with your life and stop moaning about shit like that. Even some of the shit they moan about isn't even factual. Like, the representation argument's fucking false. Most of the fucking Western media is populated by females nowadays, and it's female empowerment all the fucking time. So, the argument of female empowerment being needed is just false and asinine, to say the least. And if you look at just like the amount of female to male ratios in films nowadays, you can see what I'm saying to be true. And another thing is that people don't like to bring up is the fact that you would inherently have to depower someone to empower someone, like I brought up before. And there's just so much evidence to suggest what I'm saying to be true. But, that's just kind of my opinionation on the topic. And it's not even an opinionation. I guess I'm understating it by calling it that. It's honestly just a fact. Like, there's so much more females in the media than males. That's just how it is. And then it's like, then why haven't we have a female president? It's like, despite what your motivations and the group is trying to tell you, people aren't ready for that. People don't really want a female leader. They seen how it went with, was it Australia? They seen how it went with all the other countries. It's not good. Maybe they should be, focusing on not the female aspect of their character, but instead what they're going to do for the people. Instead of saying, I'm going to be the first female president. Instead of clamoring and bitching about that, about how there's not a female president, maybe you should be acting upon your merits. Like what you want to offer to America, or to Canada, or to whatever country you live in. You should be arguing for the merits you bring, not for the standard that you'll shut down. Because that's not really something that people want. They don't want the standard to be down because the standard benefits them. Actually, right now it doesn't really benefit them if you really think about it. But people don't want to change the standard because they're too used to tradition. I mean, you see this with the traditionalist culture. I mean, traditionalism has been dead for good 7 to 8 years. I mean, even going on maybe 10 or 20 if you're pushing it. But people are still trying to perpetuate it like it's a valid option. So, I mean, you have to think there's still people like that. So, I mean, you have to think people will sometimes just use their emotions and their own opinions to justify the reality, even though it's most of the time not factual, like you could see with the aforementioned traditionalism. And it's rather disgusting how people also say gays and all those other groups aren't mentally disabled, but they're literally just cut off their organs, their sexual organs, and they claim to be rational people. But that's just modern culture for you. Gaming's a disorder, but cutting your dick off's totally normal. And then again, I think I said this on multiple occasions in various videos and various topics. I'm not one to believe in this dumb, idiotic idea of mental illness. And even I can see that there's some mental issue going on there with these people are cutting off their dicks. So, and the reason why I don't like this gay or LGBT culture, whatever the fuck they want to call it, is because there's so much push towards it, and there's so much, conspiracy, and there's so much shit going around about this movement. It's I'm kind of like the anti-mainstream guy. Whenever the majority says, I'm usually against it because I don't want to be the sheep. I kind of just prefer to be the outcast, because the outcast is usually the one who's most stable because he has his own sense of reality. I'm the only guy in this kind of modern PC movement. Now, I'm not in the PC movement, but this modern PC culture who actually can think for themselves and has their own sense of belief system. Because I can't stand the sheep idea, because the sheep idea promotes the sheep idea, or the hood mentality, is a mentality where, you know, these people are oftentimes preaching about how they can't do shit. So that's why they do this. They're too weak mentally to handle things on their own. So they're herd together and take down one strong guy. So what they'll do is, so like army ants, right? So they're so fucking weak individually, but they'll go after, as a herd, they'll just go after anything that is a threat to their existence. So it's just disgusting how they like to say. I mean, it's factually false as well to say that they're weak, but they believe that to be true, so they create this herd mentality. Oh yeah, and another thing is that makes me dislike them is if you doubt them, you will get lambasted or even have any opinion even. They will lambast you and try to destroy you, and I think that's just disgusting. And I could not ever support someone who would lambast or try to destroy someone's livelihood because they disagree with them. And the funny thing is with that is if you try to destroy someone just for disagreeing with you, that just shows how you are as a person, and I would never support people like that, which is why I don't support the leftist culture. And the funny thing is, these people claim to be so, you know, anti-racist, but they're the same people who will say all Germans are Nazis or such discriminatory things such as that, right? Or by that same logic, all Russians must be communist. Or all Canadians must be fucking socialist, because that makes sense. It's a rather racist idea, and it's fucking disgusting to say the least. But... And I'm not one to... Racist is making discriminatory or ignorant regards or dismissive regards in regards to race and or... I mean, I'm just going to use race and or sex, because that's generally what the term generally refers to. So, I mean, that's just kind of the idea that I'm going with right now. And the active groups like feminism and the other such things are pretty much segregating themselves, yet they bitch so much about segregation, yet they're the ones who willingly segregate themselves from the rest of the populace by making these little mini groups. And it's rather funny that people try to claim as though that there's some sort of force oppressing them when they themselves create these subgroups where they're the only ones with not power, but they're the only ones with a sort of precedent. So they willingly segregate themselves into these feminist groups and these fringe minority groups, right? They willingly segregate themselves into such groups. But then they wonder, why are we segregated and why are we oppressed? It's because you willingly chose that. You willingly chose to be in your mini groups, your mini safe spaces, as you call them. And then you wonder, why doesn't anybody talk to me? It's because you segregate yourself. And then they cry when they're 30 years old and don't have any kids. It's like, wow. That's funny. And another thing is that they act like all white people are racist or bigots, but more black people than white people are actually racist. And I'll explain what I mean. There's more cases of black people being racist to white people than the reverse is. I mean, there definitely is cases of white people being racist. Don't get me wrong. That's a thing that happens. But I mean, I don't think you should get lambasted or jailed for having such opinions. I think it's just to each your own, right? You have the freedom to think and say what you want, right? That's kind of my opinionation. And another thing is they portray racism as it was like 20 years ago, where like slavery exists and we're segregated by buses. When nowadays there's just some people bitching on Twitter. Like, that's the extent of racism. It's just some people bitching at each other on Twitter. And it's like, wow, so much systematic oppression going on here. One guy on Twitter called you a faggot or called you a fucking nigger. Like, wow, I feel so bad for you. One guy on Twitter. And another thing is they fringe and try to destroy the idea of masculinity by saying it's toxic, despite masculinity building society and doing all that sort of thing. They try to always portray different inventions and different things being done by women and men. I mean, women and black people and all these other fringe groups, even though when they're factually not. BuzzFeed tried to do that and they got debunked rather easily because they tried to make up inventions made by black people and or women, and the actual factual list was a lot fucking shorter. But they didn't include that because that would be contrary to the narrative they're trying to preach. And it's rather funny that they try to act like they've done so much when factually they haven't. And I mean, I'm not trying to be insulting to them, but they factually haven't done much. That's just the reality of things. And I mean, that's definitely mostly because it's majorly a white country, it's a European country, America. So, I mean, that's probably one of the reasons there. And if the black people did so much for themselves, then why is their country literally in poverty? Like, the whole nation is in poverty. And they don't have any military, they don't have any sort of defense against attacks, and they throw spears at people as their defense. So, I mean, maybe I'm overstating it, but, they act as though they've done so much, but they haven't. It's like, that's insulting, but, I mean, it's true. I mean, there's insulting truths to life, right? That people don't like to face, like the equality argument, that's an insulting truth that people don't want to face. Like, I'm one who would agree with the aspect of equality, but there's definitely lines which exist that make it impossible for such a thing to exist in society. And they use, like, buzzwords, like, they claim not to be racist, but they use buzzwords and other things to devalue one's stance, which is more similar to what I would think a hate speech thing would be. But, they just try to change and manipulate definitions to fit their own narrative. And another thing is, they always act like females are the victims of everything, and they got destroyed by the white man, or things of that nature. Even though factually, with domestic abuse rates and things of that such, it's very mutual, right? Because let's be completely honest here and not understate how women are, or men are, or people are in general, right? So if a woman hits you, you would hit back. If a man hits a woman, the woman hits back. So it's always going to be mutual, as violence and fighting are very, very mutual things. And you would have to jail both parties to actually get a fair trial, because violence is a very mutual thing. And acting like it isn't is just negligent to the whole idea of violence in and of itself. Not saying violence is a good thing, I'm just saying violence is a mutual act by definition. I mean, there is sometimes one-way standards that happen with violence. Sometimes there's a beatdown in which one person cannot defend themselves. That does happen, but it's not very common. And when it does happen, it's rather rare. And when it does happen, it's usually as a result of someone not trying to defend themselves. Sorry, I kind of misspoke there. And another thing is, we are the privileged ones, right? According to modern society, where us men are the part of the patriarchy. Like, we support the way the society is, but, in more left-leaning countries or more liberal countries, we can get jailed for, speaking or even having opinions or things of that nature. And we can also be forced to have the standard of being called the man. We're supposed to be the man, right? We're supposed to be the physical supporter. We're supposed to financially support women on dates. We're supposed to just hold our shoulders up to the world. That's kind of how we're portrayed. We're the ones who hold the world up for the woman, right? We're expecting to bear all these burdens, right? But we're the ones who are privileged. And it doesn't make any sense under any logic. Like, socially, men are the ones who are expected to man up. So, it's rather funny when I get told about how I'm a privileged male or something of that nature. And then if you use the argument of, oh, are you femsplaining, or are you femsplaining, or what's the other one? Putting your legs too wide or something. It's just a petty complaint that a lot of the feminists use, even though it doesn't have any validity. It's like, hey, you're putting your legs too wide. It's like, it's comfortable for me to sit this way, but you can't sit the way I want you to sit. It's like, we're at a point where their complaints are, men are sitting with their legs wide and they're talking. Wow, we can't talk and we can't have our legs opened? Wow, that's rather petty. That's a rather petty remark, to say the very least. And another thing is with the idea of that they're not represented Even though, like, the entire industry of comics, the entire industry of Hollywood and film are entirely pandered to these people, but yet they act like it's some sort of them against the world, even though it's factually not. I mean, I could argue factually that it's men against the world, because the world hates men nowadays. And there's actual factual evidence to support this, unlike the feminism movement, which has none. And the arguments literally boil down to, he has his legs too wide. And the whole idea of, by the way, the whole idea of a fictional world or a fictional media is to immerse oneself into that particular medium so you can get a sense of immersion and a sense of escapist from the toxic and rather harsh reality of life. And that's what film and media was created to do. It was created to escape the harsh realities of life. And what it's doing now is bringing people into the harsh realities of life. And people don't like that, because that's not what the medium of films were intended to portray. And it's the same thing with the recent Little Mermaid movie or whatever, where they had the main character be black, because why not? It's the same thing with fucking, what's his name? Heimdall Marvel. He's black because he's black. Even though in the comics and in the source material, which is the Norse mythology, he's white because he's the brother of Sif, who's a female who happens to be white. And it makes no sense for him to be black because his sister is white. So they literally have to retcon shit just to appease their own political agenda, but yet they act like we're the ones who are privileged, despite them literally adjusting mythology and, not mythology, but like the subjective interpretation of that mythology. And Marvel's comics is war just to suit them. So they're rewriting war and they're rewriting story features to suit them. An example, Nick Fury. He was originally white, now he's black. You know, there's so many examples of them just changing things just for the sake of changing it. Instead of them, you know, just bringing up a new character, using some older characters to expand the horizon which they can represent. So, you know, brings Luke Cage in or Black Panther as representation instead. Because those characters are actually interesting and they're not carbon copies of the original that are just racified. You know, don't get... Luke Cage is an actual character. And judging... And, okay, before one says I am racist or sexist or whatever the fuck you guys want to perpetuate upon me, you know, I really... My sexual interest in women isn't just limited to white women, unlike most of these fucking religious zealots who are right-leaning. I actually have, like, I think it's more of a body standard I have for women. Well, for, the latter, it's, like, if a woman's black and she happens to have a good body and happens to have a good figure, I'll be interested in her. It doesn't really matter on color, it just matters on appearance. Like, if a black woman's fucking hot as shit, yeah, I'm gonna go bang that. Of course I would. It doesn't, so that's just kind of my little, small tangent to debunk any, racist allegations I may have. And you'd be like, oh, but that's a sexist remark. It's like, and it's objectifying women because you have a taste in attractive women because you don't want to date the land whales. It's like, no, of course we don't want to date the land whales. We want someone who's attractive. Women want the same thing. But yet they act like we're bigoted or we're bad for having that same standard. Because men can't have standards, but women can, because double standard, obviously. And this herd mentality, or the emotional weakness fallacy that they have, as I already explained before, is both to promote weakness and diminish individualistic characteristics. So that they can have this kind of control, right? So they can diminish individualistic characteristics. They can limit the chances of one becoming, you know, self-thinking, you know, or able to think for oneself, or able to perpetuate their own opinions. So if they have people who can think for themselves, they'll easily figure out that this type of garbage is BS. And the aspect of, you know, activism is just rather disgusting, because, you know, you're trying to push your beliefs upon other people, and people do not like that. People like to think what they want because, people are individuals. We're not little robots who get programmed how to function and how to build this exact object this exact way. People are a lot different than that. People have different individualistic characteristics and different individualistic beliefs, and that's how people function in society. And it's not the best society because of that. But I mean, limiting everyone to be robots isn't the answer either. And the idea of morality, right, is rather subjective too. So saying that one is immoral for disagreeing with someone is just your own opinion. So if you're like, you're immoral, you're bigoted, and if you say that to me as if it matters, as an insult, you're literally just saying, I think you're bad. That's the extent of what you're saying to me, pretty much. And it's not an insult in the slightest. As emotional thinking or emotions themselves are just a response to social stimuli. And I guess this is just my tangent on the leftism is bad topic, and I kind of agree with the topic that they're portraying. So this is kind of the end of my little tangent. This is Bob74H, the alt-right millennial, signing off.